Hi, so I want to go over with you the history of the house. So in the beginning, as humans, we were hunters and gatherers. We moved from place to place following either the animals or whatever vegetation may be popping up around. So we had to build certain types of huts or temporary structures that we could build with whatever we had. So basically, we have the just leaves and twigs and so forth in the upper left. Sorry. In the lower left, a structure might be made out of bones. So, like in Africa or someplace where they have larger animals, those bones could be used to build the house. In the right, we have the different types of real quick and easy structures where we can just sleep to stay dry. And then, of course, in the middle, we have the igloo, in which Eskimos would build so that they could go ice fishing and so forth. So the nomads, those were the people that actually built their house and could use they use these over and over and over again and can just pack them up and go with them wherever they needed to go. So they weren't just a temporary structure, but it was a temporary location, so to speak. So they could just take it with them and move on, follow the animals or the vegetation. We also know through history that we're told that we have cave dwellers or the Stone Age. And so many times we had like a cave that people could go into and they could stay dry, not necessarily stay warm unless they built a fire. And when they built a fire, they found out that in a cave situation, the walls of the cave would absorb the heat from the fire, and if the fire went out during the night, then the cave would re-radiate heat back into them. In cases like this, this house here may be warmed in the daytime by the sunlight and then re-radiate the heat on the inside during the night. And this one here may be just thermal mass to keep them cool if it got hot. Mesa Verna is in the western United States, and it was a village made into a cliff. It actually faces northeast, so it gets quite warm in the south west of the United States, and this is one way that they could stay shaded, cooled, and protected from the elements. As we go through time, we know that the Vikings were some of the earliest skilled carpenters, and this primarily became from their boat building. So they would build boats that would take them to different countries that they could raid and pillage and bring the booty back home, as to say, to their village. So their boat building practices led to their home building practices and their barn building practices. This would have been an entire village, though they would have lived together. Remember, it's kind of cold there, so they wouldn't necessarily have a house to themselves, but they would live in a communal house so that each person could do their part, everybody stays warm, and everything's hunky-dory. Later on, when the pillaging stopped, then the boat building skills led into their home building, and they were able to build longer lasting houses. And a lot of our joinery and great carpentry methods came from the Nordic people. The American Indians were the last of the nomadic people, the people that were hunters, gatherers, even well into the 20th century. Some of the last Indians gave up their practices to come and live in the reservations. And so, a lot of times we'll see the Western Plains Indians with their teepees, but we had a lot of other American Indians that were in the United States. The longhouse, the typical longhouses of the Northeast, the Iroquois, Huron, Cherokee, I'm sorry, not Cherokee, Mohawk, Abenaki, Sac, Fox, all of those Indians would have used a longhouse, again, a community type living, whereas in the Plains, Indians generally would have had more family type housing. The Southwest, we've talked about Mesa Verde, so this type of house again was a village. The family may have had a room for themselves, and then the community came together either in a tribal fashion or just a family gathering to eat or so forth like that. Here for us in Western North Carolina, we have the Southeast Indians, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, and some other Indians, Catawbas, that built their houses much like this. Just so you know, one of the oldest, the first interior Spanish fort was built in Morganton, North Carolina, called Fort San Juan, and it was built in the Indian village of Jawara. So the city of Morganton has actually recreated some of these structures here in the city at Catawba Meadows. So if you ever want to take a chance to go see some of this, go down to Morganton, Catawba Meadows, and look for the Jawara village recreation. So we got into early American. Our ancestors landed here, were trying to make a life in the New World. They would hack out some woods and clear a forest, make some logs, build their house. And when they first did that, they would come into play. It would be the first winter, to say. They would make their chimneys out of wood, and they would line these chimneys with creek mud or clay that they could find to help protect them. Now, after the first year, they would generally tear these down and erect a rock chimney that would last for a couple of winters after that. One of the problems was, let me stop and say something here. Organic material such as grass and trees and so forth like that expand and contract with moisture. Mineral material such as rock and the clay expand and contract with heat. So these two are expanding and contracting at different rates. So would the inside of this. So we would build a fire in there, and that mineral lining that they had in there, the clay lining, would expand with the heat. If it was raining, then these outside would expand with the wetness, and then these two are dislike materials, so they would be expanding and contracting at different rates with different conditions. So a lot of times this would break down, it may catch a fire, and they would lose the house. If they can make it through the first winter, a lot of times they would try to replace these chimneys with rock structures because it was more safe and lasting longer. Not very many structures still stand that have the wooden chimney, and it was a constant maintenance headache, so a lot of them went over to the stone. If they made it through the first year or the second year, and this here would have been the first portion of this house, this would have been the first portion of this house, if it lasted and they were able to put up the stone work, then these parts right here would have become the kitchen. They used it as the living area and cooking area and everything area, until they could get the larger structure made. Once the larger structure made, this became the living and sleeping areas, and this became the kitchen. One of the reasons so is because, number one, you're cooking in here 365 days of the year, and it gets hot. So in the summertime, especially in western North Carolina, we want to try to keep this heat separate from the house. The house would have had its own heat source that it would have used only in the wintertime, but then we could have kept this separate so that we didn't burn up in the summertime. Most of these houses, the kitchens had doors opposing each other. So there would have been a door here, there would have been a door on the other side, so that we get a cross breeze through here so Mama's not dying in the middle of the summertime while she's cooking. A third reason that these are separate was to keep, if the kitchen, because the kitchen had fire in it on a daily basis, then, you know, the chimney would break down faster and require more maintenance. And a lot of times we're out in the field, we're doing farming, we're taking care of the animals, we don't have time to fix that. If this catches on fire, then hopefully it only burns this down and doesn't burn the main structure down. If we need to, we can throw us a rope across through here, have the horse or mule tear it down, and then we can separate these two houses completely. Here, these do not touch at all. So when you're going from the living section into the kitchen, then you'll notice that these two roofs come together, so there's probably a drip line in there of rain that you get wet going from the kitchen to the living space. So as we talked about here, we put in mud and so forth to close these cracks up here. A lot of times these first year houses may have been a dirt floor. We could have put grass and clay and so forth down through here to keep a draft from coming in. And the earth stays at constant temperature year round, so we could use it to stay cool at night. We could sleep on the ground at night in the summertime and stay cool. And then in the wintertime, it would be warmer than, 10 degrees worth of, excuse me, air coming in here. It's going up under something like this. Now this is a church. And a lot of times the churches and the houses were built on stone pillars like this when they did build a wooden floor. That kept the floor up above the grade so it doesn't rot. Here in our climate, we do have termites, and that was a big concern that they'd have to deal with. So they could put it up on stones, get it out of the way, and then they've got to contend with air coming up through here. And here as well, you can see this has a little bit of a gap here. So what they started doing was they started blocking this end down here, and so as to keep this air from flowing through here. But by doing so, they were creating a moisture problem. Moisture can get sucked up through the earth here and deposited on the inside and does not dry out. So homes were built for different cultural reasons as well. Maybe in China, it had a specific roof line that it wants to use for a temple or maybe even for its house. In Japan, they had a certain way of building there that they used paper windows. Indonesia, they would build their houses out in the waterways so that they could fish directly from the bottom of it. One of the things is fish love dark places, so you might be walking across a dock and you find that fish seem to flourish under the dock. So by building the houses out here, they actually created a farm in the water for fish to attract the fish so that they could just basically fish from their own kitchen if they needed to. Different types of buildings use different materials depending on what was available at hand, or what they could actually pay for. So this one here is very poor. The people here are very poor. They may have just worked for a sawmill to get lumber to build their house. Obviously here, these folks here had stone around, so they built their house out of stone. This house here is a Swedish type house. And it utilizes the building types at that particular time, where they used posts, and then they would use these as diagonal indicators to strengthen the walls and so forth. And then in between it was just clay or stucco that they would fill these places full. This, even though it looks like a barn, it is a northern type house, has very little overhang, tall buildings, lots of windows to open up in the summertime. Again, this is all sawmilled lumber, and we got some brick going on up here with a slate roof. After World War II, we had kind of a boom going on. We ended up building suburbans. So we ended up having developments all over the place. Houses were being built very cheaply, very fastly, and a lot of times they were very simple and didn't have a whole lot of specialty to them. This particular house probably had asbestos siding. At this time also, this is one of the first times that we see the fake shutter on a window. Before, in these times here, we would have actually put shutters on these and they would have been used. These are just there as an aesthetic. Notice that it's only on the curb side. They don't have them on the side because it would have been more expensive to do that. Some of these houses look exactly alike, and the only thing changed is maybe a window or two on the outside. Mill houses fall into the same thing. So a person would start a mill or have a state job where they needed to house a lot of people, and they would build all of these houses pretty much exactly the same. This is from Morganton here. Broughton Hospital was built in the 1880s, and these houses were built for the doctors and psychologists that worked at Broughton Hospital. They're still owned by the state, and now they're offices and so forth. You may recognize these mill houses here. They are from the Henry River Mill in eastern Burke County. These were the homes of Katniss in the movie The Hunger Games. These other houses were from different places. Cotton mills may have created this housing here. Other steel mills up in bigger towns. These houses were just slammed up as fast as they could go. No insulation, no air tightness, nothing in them. They were just built as a shelter. So the prestigious socialites, they had to have their way of building as well. So, it might have been a big house, federal style, may have been an extremely ridiculous house, such as we have as the Biltmore House, or it may be something small, like a Victorian house that has steep roofs and conical shapes on them to kind of make them stick out above the rest. So we as humans, we have this tendency to want to feel more important than other people, so we may have done that in some way, like showing our house in our house. So some of the modern day looks, we've got the different ranch type houses that came out. So ranch house was a big thing that came out. We started putting garages on to protect our cars. You may recognize this house here is the Brady Bunch house from the 60s. And then some of our more modern type houses that are built much better, and different aspects of them. So let's talk about how we kind of build these houses. So going back to the second law of thermodynamics states that all elements must equal, meaning that hot tends to go to cold, high pressure tends to go to low pressure, wet seems to go to dry. So how do we protect those in the modern day house is by going from hot to cold. We're going to put in a great HVAC system and lots of insulation. Going from high pressure to low pressure, we're going to use airtight gypsum board and caulk to make this very tight. We're going to run a blower door test on this so that we can test this tightness. We want to go from wet to dry, so we need to protect our house with house wrap, caulk, and proper roofing on there to keep any type of rain leakage or anything on here. Also, I might say that because we take a shower in the house, because we run water in the house, then plumbing also could be added on here, or should I say good plumbing, and proper ventilation. So if we're taking a shower, we need to have that ventilator on in the bathroom to pull that moist air out of there. And that actually should run 30 minutes after you take the shower. It's continue to run 30 minutes after you take a shower. So if you have a vent in your bathroom, you should have it on a timer that will go off in 30 minutes afterwards. So let's go back and talk about the heat transfers again. We've got radiation that we have to deal with, we've got conduction that we have to deal with, and we've got convection to deal with. So how do we deal with those in a house? Is we color coat the roof. All right, whites or metal colors, such as anything reflective, basically like silver, copper, so forth like that, that is going to reflect the sun. The sun's radiation is going to help on that. Adding foil. Now, I know this sounds like a funny thing, but some materials can be bought with foil face on it. But believe it or not, one of the cheapest things that you could do for your house is buy a whole bunch of Reynolds wrap and make sure that the shiny side is up. Put it on your roof before you put your shingles on, and that would help with, that would cut down on the radiation that's going to be absorbed in there, and any other type of reflective material that could keep the UV light off of your house. Conduction. We use a thermal skin and thermal breaks. So a thermal skin, our insulation code says that the walls shall have 13 plus 2, meaning that we're going to have an R13 insulation in between the studs, and then we're going to have let me just pull this up right quick. Okay, so let's say that we have a wall. Here's our wall, and here's our studs, and we have gypboard on the inside, and we have something on the outside, such as our sheathing. All right, so then we get my studs put in. We have insulation in between here. Now that insulation works great right there, but we have a great big thermal bridge right here that's going to allow heat to go back and forth through that stud right there. So when we say that it's 13 plus 2, means that we're going to have an R13 in here between the cavity, and then we're going to have an R2 out here that is going to be our thermal skin. This is a non-stop thermal barrier around the house. And obviously you see from my line here, I cut the line in two. So by cutting that line in two right there, I am stopping this transfer of heat through that layer of insulation there. That is a thermal skin and a thermal break. So, you know, if we could build this wall and have this wall, this portion of the wall, not connected to the outside, then that is a thermal break. We don't have a thermal bridge which allows therms to pass through there. Convection is the movement of air. So we need to put in insulation, which we've done, and then we do put a whole bunch of air sealing on the outside. Generally as the house wrap, we do that, tape all of that, zip board. On the inside, we have proper air sealing of gypsum board on the inside that will take care of all of that. I hope this has been beneficial to you. I thank you and have a good day.